I died on a Tuesday, not dramatically, not with screaming or sirens. I died quietly, in a hospital bed, with my sister holding my fiancé's hand on the other side of the room, and neither of them noticed the exact moment I stopped breathing. That was the last thing I saw before everything went dark. And then I woke up, 3 years earlier, in my own childhood bedroom, heart pounding, hands shaking, alive. For a moment, I thought God had given me a gift. Then I remembered the wedding invitation I found hidden in my sister's drawer, the one with her name where mine should have been, the one dated 6 months before she told me Shed never even looked at Daniel that way. I lay there in that bed, in that younger version of my body, staring at the ceiling, and I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to fight for my life back. I was going to let her have it, every single piece of it, and then I was going to watch her drown in it. If you've never seen someone hand their enemy a throne just to watch them fall off it, keep watching. Because what my sister built on top of my grave, I buried her in it. The first thing I did when I woke up in that body, in that life, was cry. Not because I was scared, not because I was confused. I cried because I remembered everything. Every smile my sister fake gave me at my engagement dinner. Every time Daniel looked at her a half second too long and I told myself I was imagining it. Every single moment I spent trusting two people who were already planning my replacement before I even knew I was being erased. I was 24 again, it was a cold March morning, and I had exactly 3 years before the version of me that existed before, the trusting, blind, stupid version, would die alone in a hospital room, while the two people she loved most held each other's hands. Not this time. I sat up slowly and looked around my old bedroom, the framed photo of me and my sister on the dresser, both of us smiling, me with my arm around her, her leaning into me like I was her whole world. I picked it up, studied her face, even in that photo, even years before the betrayal. Her eyes weren't on the camera, they were on me, watching, calculating, measuring. How did I never see it? I set the photo face down and got out of bed. Let me tell you something about my sister Kayla. She was the kind of beautiful that made rooms go quiet, the kind of charming that made people feel chosen just because she remembered their name. Everyone loved her, our mother, our father, every friend we ever shared. And I loved her most of all. That was my first mistake. My second mistake was introducing her to Daniel. Daniel Howe, my college boyfriend, the man I thought I was going to spend my life with. Tall, sharp, successful, and completely obsessed with status in ways I chose not to see back then. He proposed to me on a rooftop in downtown Chicago. Champagne, string lights, the whole movie scene. What he didn't tell me that night, what I only found out after I died, was that 2 weeks before that proposal, he and Kayla had already kissed at a work party, and instead of telling me, they both decided to bury it. They buried it for 3 years, and they buried me along with it. But here's the twist I never saw coming the first time around, and the one that changed everything once I came back. On that first Reborn morning, I went downstairs for breakfast. Normal, calm, like I didn't know anything. My mother was at the stove. My father was reading the news. Kayla was sitting at the kitchen table in her silk robe, scrolling through her phone with that effortless glow she always had. And Daniel was already there, at our kitchen table, at 8 in the morning, the first time I lived this day. I thought nothing of it. He was my fiancé. Of course he visited early sometimes. But now, with everything I knew, I watched differently. I watched how Kayla didn't look up when I walked in, but her jaw tightened the smallest amount. I watched how Daniel smiled at me, then immediately glanced at Kayla. I watched how my mother told me I looked tired and Kayla said, "She always looks tired lately," and they both laughed softly like it was a joke. It wasn't a joke, it was a rehearsal. They had already decided who I was going to be in this story. The tired one, the plain one, the one who would eventually step aside gracefully. I sat down across from Kayla, poured my coffee, smiled at Daniel, and for the first time in either of my lives, I felt nothing for him. Not love, not warmth, not even anger, just strategy. Because what nobody at that table knew, what nobody would know until it was far too late, was that Kayla's perfect little secret wasn't the only one hiding in this family. There was another one she didn't even know existed, and I had 3 years to find it. There's a specific kind of power that comes from knowing the ending before the story even starts. Most people walk through life reacting. Shocked by betrayal, broken by loss, blindsided by the people they trusted. I used to be that person. I used to feel everything first and think second. Not anymore. This time, I was going to think first, feel nothing, and move like someone who had already won. The first smart choice I made happened exactly 4 days after I came back. Daniel took me to dinner, same restaurant he always chose. Upscale, candlelit, the kind of place designed to make women feel grateful just for being there. He ordered for both of us without asking. I used to find that romantic. Now it just told me everything I needed to know about how he saw me. Halfway through the meal, he reached across the table and held my hand. "You've been quiet lately," he said. "Everything okay?" I looked at him, really looked, and smiled the way you smile at someone you've already decided to leave. Soft, patient, almost sad. "I've just been thinking about the future," I said. He nodded like that was the right answer, like my future was something he had already organized and filed away. What he didn't know was that 4 days earlier, I had gone through his jacket pocket while he was in the shower at our apartment. Not because I suspected something new. I already knew everything. I did it because I needed proof. Something physical, something I could hold, and I found it. A receipt, a jewelry store 2 towns over. Dated 8 months from now, the first time I lived this life, I never found that receipt. I never knew Head bought Kayla a ring 6 months before he ended things with me. I always thought the breakup came first. It didn't. He bought her ring while we were still together. While I was still planning our wedding. While I was still calling him every night before bed like the faithful, trusting woman I was. I folded that receipt and put it in my coat pocket. I said nothing. I smiled through the rest of dinner. But here's where the first real twist of my second life happened. And I promise you, I did not see it coming either. 2 weeks later, I quietly started pulling back from the wedding planning. Small things, missed calls, rescheduled meetings with the venue coordinator, nothing dramatic, just distance. Kayla noticed immediately. She showed up at my apartment on a Wednesday evening with wine and that signature soft concern she wore like a costume. "You seem off," she said, settling onto my couch like she owned it. "Talk to me. That's what sisters are for. That's what sisters are for." I almost laughed. Instead, I told her I'd been feeling overwhelmed. Stressed that sometimes I looked at the wedding plans and felt a strange heaviness I couldn't explain. She leaned forward, eyes wide, earnest. "Maybe," she said carefully. "You're just not ready." There it was, the first gentle push, disguised as concern, wrapped in love. She was already testing the door, checking how close I was to walking away on my own so she wouldn't have to do the dirty work of pushing me out. I looked at her and nodded slowly like her words had really landed. "Maybe you're right," I whispered, and I watched relief flicker across her face for exactly half a second before she covered it with sympathy. She thought she was winning. She had no idea I had just recorded the entire conversation on my phone. But that recording wasn't even the most important thing I discovered that night. Because when Kayla got up to refill her wine glass, her phone buzzed on the cushion beside me. I glanced down without touching it. One preview line, one name, one message that made my blood run completely cold. It wasn't from Daniel. The name on that screen was one I hadn't seen in years. Marcus Webb, my father's former business partner, the man who disappeared from our lives when I was 17 after some quiet falling out my parents never fully explained. The man my mother would go pale over if his name ever accidentally came up at dinner, the man nobody in our family talked about. Ever. And he was texting my sister at 9 p.m. on a Wednesday. I didn't touch her phone. I didn't read further. I just sat back, wine glass in hand, and filed that name away in the part of my brain I was now using exclusively for ammunition. When Kayla came back and picked up her phone, her expression didn't change. She was good. She'd always been good, but I was better now. Because I wasn't looking at her the way a sister looks at a sister anymore. I was looking at her the way a chess player looks at a piece that just revealed its position too early. I spent the next 2 weeks pulling on that thread quietly. Marcus Webb wasn't hard to find. Had relocated to Atlanta, running a private investment firm. Successful, polished, completely off our family's radar, or so my parents believed. But here was the twist that cracked my entire understanding of the past open like a fault line. Marcus Webb wasn't just my father's old business partner. He was Kayla's biological father. I know how that sounds. I sat in my car in a parking garage for 40 minutes after I confirmed it, just staring at the steering wheel. Because this wasn't something I'd known in my first life, this was something I was only uncovering now, in this second chance. Because this time, I was actually looking. My mother had an affair. 26 years ago, Marcus Webb was the result. My father, the man who coached Kayla's soccer games and walked her through college applications and called her his pride, had raised another man's daughter his entire life. And Marcus Webb knew he had been quietly funneling money to Kayla for the past 3 years. Not gifts, not charity, strategic transfers. The kind that don't show up unless you know exactly where to look and have a contact at a financial firm who owes you a favor. Which, in this second life, I made sure I had. Kayla wasn't just after Daniel and my identity out of jealousy. She was building a safety net, a new life, a new name, my reputation, my connections. Because she had found out the truth about her own origins, and she was terrified of what would happen if it ever came out. She wasn't stealing my life because she wanted to be me. She was stealing my life because she needed cover. That changed everything, because now I understood the full architecture of the betrayal. It wasn't just a sister who wanted my fiancé. It was a woman who had discovered a secret that could detonate her entire family. And instead of facing it, she decided to quietly hollow out my existence and climb inside it. Use my name, use my relationship, use my social standing, and let me disappear. Too heartbroken, too humiliated, too erased to ever be a threat. That's why, in my first life, I ended up in that hospital bed. The stress, the isolation, the slow destruction of my confidence, my finances, my support system, all of it engineered, none of it accidental. She didn't just steal from me. She had been quietly dismantling me. I drove to my parents' house that evening, sat at the dinner table, watched my father pass Kayla the bread basket with that proud, gentle smile he always gave her. She caught my eye across the table and gave me that warm, sisterly look. I smiled back, and under the table, I pressed send on an email I had spent 3 days carefully writing, addressed to Marcus Webb. Marcus Webb replied within 6 hours. No greeting, no pleasantries, just 4 words. When and where, alone. I smiled at my phone screen and typed back a coffee shop address in a neutral part of the city. Somewhere public, somewhere nobody from our world would casually walk into. I wasn't afraid of Marcus Webb. I was afraid of what Kayla would do if she found out I'd contacted him before I was ready. So I moved carefully, quietly. The way you move when you're carrying something explosive and the people around you don't know it yet. Marcus was not what I expected. He was composed, expensive suit, careful eyes, the kind of man who had spent decades making sure nothing touched him. And you could see it in the way he sat, like someone who had long ago decided that survival mattered more than conscience. He looked at me across the coffee table and said, "You look like your mother," I said, "and Kayla looks like you." Silence. Then he exhaled slowly and said, "What do you want?" Here's the thing about powerful men who've been hiding secrets for 26 years. They assume everyone wants money. It's the only language they fully trust. I leaned forward and said, "I don't want your money, Marcus. I want your testimony." His expression shifted just slightly, that careful composure cracking at one edge. I told him I knew everything. The affair, the payments to Kayla, the quiet agreement they'd apparently reached, that he would fund her in exchange for her silence about his involvement. A neat, private arrangement that kept both of them protected. What I didn't tell him was how I knew. Some cards you keep face down until the exact right moment. I gave him 72 hours to decide. And while Marcus sat with that, the rest of my plan started moving. Because here's the twist nobody saw coming. Not Kayla, not Daniel, not anyone. While I had been quietly pulling on threads for weeks, Daniel had been unraveling on his own without any help from me at all. His company, the investment firm he ran with 2 partners, was under a quiet SEC review. Something I had known was coming in my first life but never paid attention to because I was too consumed by the wedding, by love, by the performance of being a happy future wife. This time I paid attention, I had spent 3 months positioning myself. I had taken a junior consulting role at a firm that worked adjacent to his industry. I had made one very specific phone call to a journalist I went to college with, a woman who covered financial fraud and owed me a favor from a story I helped her fact-check years ago. I didn't give her Daniel's name. Not yet. I just told her to start looking at mid-size investment firms that had been moving client funds through shell accounts in the Cayman Islands. She was a good journalist. She found him in 11 days. The article dropped on a Thursday morning. I was at my kitchen table with coffee when my phone started buzzing. First 1 notification, then 5. Then my screen wouldn't stop. Daniel's name, his firm, words like alleged misconduct and client fund mismanagement sitting right next to a photo of him at a charity gala, looking polished, untouchable, exactly the way he always wanted to look. 40 minutes later, Kayla called me. Her voice was different, tight, like someone trying very hard to sound casual while standing in a building that was on fire. "Have you seen the news?" she asked. "What news?" I said. A pause, then, "Never mind, are you okay? You sound strange." I sound strange. I almost laughed out loud. "I'm fine, Kayla," I said softly. "Actually, I've never been better." Another pause, longer this time, and in that silence I could hear it. The first real crack of fear in a woman who had never once been afraid of me. "What did you do?" she whispered. I didn't answer. I hung up, and then my front door buzzed, and when I looked at the intercom screen, the face staring back at me was the last one I expected. It was my mother, and she had been crying. My mother looked 10 years older standing in my doorway. No makeup, hair pulled back, hands wrapped around each other like she was trying to hold herself together by sheer grip. She had never looked small to me before. She had always been the woman who filled a room. Strong opinions, sharp tongue, the kind of presence that made you sit straighter just by walking in. But standing there that morning, she just looked like someone whose secrets had finally caught up with her. I let her in. She sat on my couch and stared at her hands for a long moment before she spoke. "Marcus called me," she said quietly. I said nothing. "He told me you met with him." She looked up. "How long have you known?" "Long enough," I said. She closed her eyes. I never wanted Kayla to find out. I never wanted any of this. But it happened anyway, I said. Not unkindly, just clearly. And instead of telling the truth, you let it rot underneath everything. And Kayla built her entire life on top of that rot. And she pulled me down into it. My mother's face crumpled. And here is the moment I want you to understand, because this is the part that surprised even me. I didn't feel satisfaction watching her cry. I didn't feel rage either. I felt something quieter and more final than both of those things. I felt free. The full collapse happened over the next 3 weeks, and it was not slow and it was not gentle. Daniel's firm was formally investigated. 2 of his partners cooperated with regulators immediately, which meant Daniel had no shield left. His assets were frozen. His reputation, that carefully constructed, charity gala, Instagram-curated reputation, dissolved overnight. The same social circles that had celebrated him started distancing themselves with the practiced speed of people who had never actually been his friends. Kayla stood by him publicly for exactly 9 days. I know because I watched. I watched her post careful, vague statements of support. I watched the comments turn skeptical. I watched her follower count, which she had spent years building using the aesthetic of my life, my taste, my style as a blueprint, start quietly dropping. Then Marcus Webb, under pressure from the testimony I had formally provided to a family attorney, acknowledged Kayla's paternity in a legal document that became relevant to an estate dispute his legitimate children had filed. It went public, not because I leaked it, because his other family did, and suddenly Kayla wasn't just the woman whose fiancé was under federal investigation. She was also the secret daughter of a man embroiled in his own legal battle, with a mother who had lied for 26 years and a stolen identity that several people in our social circle were now quietly questioning. She called me 4 times that week. I answered once. "Why?" She asked just that one word, like she deserved an explanation. I thought about everything I wanted to say. Every version of this conversation I had rehearsed in my head. Every sharp, devastating line I had prepared. Instead, I said, Because you made a choice, Kayla. You chose this a long time ago. I just stopped getting in the way of the consequences. Silence then, very quietly. I'm sorry. 2 words, 3 years too late, 1 lifetime too late. I know, I said, and I hung up for the last time. Here is what nobody tells you about revenge. The real kind, the slow kind. The kind built on patience and clarity instead of rage. It doesn't feel like winning. It feels like exhaling. Like finally putting down something so heavy you forgot you were carrying it. I moved to a new city 4 months later. New apartment, new consulting firm, new life built entirely on my own foundation. No one else's name, no borrowed identity, no performance of someone I thought I was supposed to be. I was 31 years old and completely, terrifyingly free. And the last thing I heard about Kayla, through a mutual friend who didn't know the full story, was that she had moved back into our parents' house. Into her old childhood bedroom, the one right next to mine. Back to the beginning, back to nothing, while I was finally, completely, irrevocably gone. Some people spend their whole lives trying to become someone else. I just became myself, and that was enough to destroy everything she built.